Hello, my name is Torsten Opper. I'm a curator in the Department of Greece and Rome here in the British Museum. Welcome to my corner. One of my interests and specialisms really is Roman portraiture or ancient portraiture in general. I love ancient sculpture. I find portraits quite intriguing. What we could do today is just look at ways we can study a portrait head like this. What we should be looking out for, what the key questions are, how you contextualize it, how you turn it back from a dead object into something meaningful that carries a message, and how we can really put ourselves in the position of a Roman who would have looked at this at the time. There's a lot of background that we can bring to bear, and that makes it really fascinating. For me, there are different aspects. It's not even about how naturalistic they are. It's what the message they were meant to carry and how to decode that. So there's your immediate gut reaction. If you look at a portrait, you have a face of someone. So there's a meeting, metaphorically speaking, of individuals. And you know, even that is quite powerful. Gazing into the eyes of Nero now is something special. But it's the little coded messages. It's reconstructing how it would have looked, imagining what type of body it sat on, how you are meant to see it. Just going right in, it's a portrait of the Emperor Nero, who reigned from AD 54 to 68. Over his lifetime, Nero had 4 different portrait types. Portrait types are usually created for a specific occasion. In the exhibition, the first statue of Nero you'll see shows him as a boy, 12, 13 years old. That's probably when he was adopted by Claudius and built up as a successor. So that was the first occasion where he needed to be known to by the Roman public, where his images were produced and put out there. The next big occasion was in AD 54, when he became emperor after Claudius's death. This portrait here, a bronze head, clearly belongs to Nero's second type, so the type created in AD 54. The third type came in AD 59 for his 5-year anniversary on the throne, and then probably the last type in AD 64 for his 10-year anniversary on the throne. These are the big occasions that mark an emperor's reign. This gives us a fairly good indication when this was produced, AD 54 to 59 roughly. Often they only had coins, so 2-dimensional sources. The model they had when they made this bronze version of the head. The profile is very clear and it compares very closely to inscribed coin portraits of Nero. That's how you identify portraits of Roman emperors, really. The coins are very clear, they're named, and they give us dates of offices. So we know who it is and roughly when the portrait was created. It's a bronze head, bronze copper alloy. These have very rarely survived from antiquity. There are only 1 or 2 other Nero portraits in bronze that have survived, so ours is very special. This is a life-sized, roughly life-sized head. You can probably compare my head to the bronze portrait. The measure for comparison usually is chin to top of the head, chin to crown. In this case, that's about 23 centimeters, which is considered just about life-size. Most Roman portraits, ancient portraits, are taller. They look slightly funny, and I think you can appreciate it from where you sit now. It's an odd shape to the face. There's this small pointed chin, which is quite typical for Nero, but is accentuated here. The protruding ears are quite significant. You find those in many Nero portraits. One thing that's immediately obvious is that the eye sockets are empty. That's the way the head was cast. They were originally filled with coloured stone, coloured glass. Sometimes in a local northwestern province context, they can be enamelled. I think here it was probably stone. So you'd have a white eyeball and a proper dark iris and pupil. So very lifelike. One of our other great objects in the British Museum is the Meroe head of Augustus. That's one of the very few heads that have survived from antiquity with the original inlet eyes. And that's roughly how I have to imagine our Nero here. Now, as we said, the proportions of the face look a little bit unusual, especially at eye height. It changes when you see him from below. You need to remember that this was part of a statue originally, so it would have been seen from below at an angle. We've only, in the run-up to our exhibition, commissioned new photographs after a lot of discussion, and they're taken from a lower angle, and straight away it changes the proportions. He looks a lot more authoritative and imperious in that way. What I also found quite interesting, because only the frontal view is usually online or in books, I'll turn it slightly into profile. And I don't know what you think, but it looks a lot more Roman to me in profile. And fantastic that the nose is preserved. You don't often get that with marble statues. When they fall over, the nose is the first thing to go. It's here. It has this typically Julio-Claudian form. It's slightly aquiline, so rarely preserved. You can see that it's very broken here. We'll come back to why that is. I'll turn it a little around for you so you can see what we have here is the original neckline. And I've read some of the reports that were done of it, the scientific examination. There's some traces of solder at the back of the neck. And that indicates that the whole statue was cast in different parts. It's often easier to do it that way, that it was linked to a body there. Now, you don't want an unsightly solder line visible, so that's a clear indication that the body was draped in a toga, the official Roman costume, if you like, or more likely in this case with Nero and an emperor in military body armor. Roman portraits, an important thing is really the messages they carry. And they're not, we're now used now we're used to selfies or to passport photographs. So it's really the face that matters. In official Roman portraiture, it's the whole body. So it matters if you're in the toga, for example, that shows you're a Roman citizen. If you're in military armor, whether you're standing, whether you're on horseback, whether you're sitting, these all carry messages. The inscription is very important for context. All this is lost here. We really only have the face, but we can painfully reconstruct sometimes. We can identify certain body types that may have gone with these statues, and that gives us a fuller meaning. It was discovered in spring 1907 by a local schoolboy in the muddy bed of the River Alde in Suffolk. Someone local bought it off that schoolboy, Mr. Holland, and displayed it. But a year later, in 1908, it came to London for the first time. It was displayed by the Society of Antiquaries, and they had one of their regular meetings, and they discussed it. And we have minutes of the meeting, and it was identified straight away as a Roman portrait of the Julio-Claudian period. So the Julio-Claudians are the imperial family from Augustus to Nero, the first 5 Roman emperors. But the identification was quite open. You have to understand at that time, portraits weren't really researched. There weren't many publications with photographs for comparisons and so on, so different names were put forward. In 1915, there was a first article that linked the head to Claudius in particular. Other names had been mentioned before, his predecessor, other princes of the period. And it linked it to Claudius, but also to Colchester, the Roman capital at the time. Colchester is about 40 miles to the southwest of the find spot. It was heavily corroded when it was found. It's now been cleaned and conserved. There are only small bits where we can get an idea of the original surface. According to the scientific reports, here above the right eye, there's an area where you have a little bit of the original black patina left. But clearly, it's quite well preserved, other than the physical damage it suffered when it was torn down. That's also an indication that it probably wasn't on display for very long. If it was made the earliest in AD 54, maybe ripped down in AD 60-61, that gives you a fairly short window for how long this would have been out on display. You see quite savage marks on the head. It was clearly hit from the right with a sharp implement here. You can see a very deep indentation and holes as well. It was probably stuck repeatedly. And also here at the back, you see it better in profile. You can probably see a dent here. It hasn't pierced the bronze, but someone whacked it really hard. Why would they do that? With Nero, there are two possible scenarios. After his death through enforced suicide in AD 68, many of his statues were toppled over and removed. There was something we now call, it's a modern term really, damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of his memory. So that's his images were removed, destroyed, toppled, taken off display. His name was erased from inscriptions. So that's a potential scenario for this statue too. Although you wonder why it would then end up 40 miles to the north in a river. It doesn't really make sense. The other is, and that theory came up in 1914 for the first time, that it's linked to an event in Britain that was hugely significant in Nero's reign. That's the Boudica rebellion in AD 61. Britain had only been conquered. The core part of the province has just been turned over to a civilian administration, but really all around it towards Wales and the north were tribal territories. There was ongoing warfare, and you have to think of the province as swarming with soldiers, with military contractors, with tax farmers. The sources tell us that there was a lot of uncontrolled exploitation. The locals were treated with great disrespect. Britain was one of the provinces where the Roman army and their commanders in particular could still hope to make booty like in the old days. That wasn't possible in other parts of the empire anymore. Boudica was the leader, the queen of the Iceni tribe. She'd taken over from her late husband. It seems that the Romans tried to take over Boudica's territory. That often happened. The system of rule was based on treaties with local rulers, but that didn't mean that you could pass on your kingdom, say, or your tribal territory to your descendants. Sometimes it was incorporated in the Roman province. That's what may have happened here. It's also reported that Romans suddenly called in loans, raised taxes. So there was great discontent that erupted in a violent rebellion against Roman rule. And the Iceni, led by Boudica and other allied tribes, went to the capital, to Camulodunum, Colchester, and sacked it. There were no city walls at the time. The Romans had to flee to the local temple, which was a giant temple of Claudius, the founder of Colchester, of Roman Colchester. They held out for 2-3 days, and then the whole place was burnt down, and they were all killed and slaughtered. The rebels moved on, or freedom fighters, moved on, sacked Londinium and Verulamium, modern St. Albans, and only afterwards were they defeated in battle. But the conflict was very brutal. The image of the emperor really stood in for the emperor himself, for the person of the emperor. So like you have Church Asylum now, you could go and hug the image of the emperor, and that would keep you safe for a while. So no surprise that there's a real hatred then, of course, that is taken out on the statue as well. Why the River Alde? So what's it about the find spot and the background? I said the River Alde is in Suffolk. In antiquity, in the Roman period, it may have formed the border between tribal territories, between the Iceni to the north in Norfolk and the Trinovantes just to the south. That's the tribal formation around Colchester. So one possibility is that the Iceni or Trinovantes during the rebellion tore the statue down, hacked off the head, highly symbolic, maybe took it off, and then ritually deposited in the river. A well-established tradition in the northwest provinces are these water deposits. Jewellery, booty, a lot of weapons. Also in the Thames, for example, they found lots of skulls, so it's highly symbolic. And putting it in that river, if that river also was a tribal boundary, probably invests that boundary with added significance. Importantly, Nero now is associated with totally different values. Our image of Nero, and that's something we're trying to question in the exhibition, is a monster, a megalomaniac, a deluded artist. You can project that on an isolated head, but if you imagine him as a full statue in military body armor as commander-in-chief, the aura of the image is completely different. And that's really crucial, to go back to the way a Roman public in Nero's day would have seen his images.